Good morning and welcome to the Hobby Breakfast Show. It is your hosts, Onod and OT.
Hello.
No Mayor today. Mayor is busy at an undisclosed location.
Never seen him and Jay Clare in the same room. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, it's very true. And so as is probably on the screen, because I imagine that I've edited it in as the opening to this, we're going to be talking about casual and thematic games in the new edition. I guess this video is a kind of... What is this video? We're kind of partially pointing out something that we think about the way the game is moving, and then I guess we're also trying to... Are we advocating for something? Is that what we're doing here?
I see it more as a protest video. I think we're fighting for those who've had their voices taken away and been marginalised by big SBG.
We're stomping around with our placards to protest Big Spug. Yeah.
Oh, this isn't gonna work.
Without Mayor's presence, this is already careened into just fucking shit. I guess. Well, let's start off with our thoughts on the new edition, and I guess perhaps the reasons why you and me aren't really playing the new edition. I mean, there are other reasons to do with like not having enough time, basically. But Mayor has been chugging along. Mayor's probably been playing more of this edition than he was of the end of last edition, to be honest.
Yeah, it's true.
But we just haven't really bitten the hook.
Overcome the initial barriers that I think both of us felt were created by the new edition.
And I think that for me, this has kind of boiled down to, it hasn't felt like the edition has been made for the way that I prefer to play the game. And I guess what we're going to be talking about in this episode is like, can you make a game system more like what you want? And I think the answer is yes. But I think we're starting off by just sort of like talking about why I don't feel like it's for me, and I think that because you're kind of over your MESBG tournament phase, you're now more in the camp that I perhaps naturally exist in.
Yeah, I've had more of an arc. You've been more consistent throughout.
So I guess what this video is sort of how to bring the theme back and why we feel like the theme has gone. And I think the first thing that we've really noticed is it's not necessarily linked into exactly what we're going to talk about, but as a direction for the rule set, we sort of immediately noticed how the narrative scenarios and essentially all reference to any way to play the game other than match play has kind of been stripped out of the books.
Yeah.
And obviously they've been posting a very slim range of...
It couldn't be much slimmer, could it? Like, my goodness.
Yeah, essentially copy-pasted
3
scenarios for the first and second film, bearing in mind that like the first film alone in Quest of the Ring Bearer last edition probably had like 12?
I was going to say 20. I was going to say either 12
as many
or 16.
As that.
It was because even Scouring had 16 plus, I think.
Yeah. And then Two Towers has been massacred. Like, if you consider that War of the Rohirrim was basically a Two Towers source book.
Yeah.
Or War in Rohan, sorry, I'm getting the new film mixed up with the old book. And then you also had quest scenarios that were Two Towers following like Frodo. Like, that they just aren't really supporting it. And yes, sure, I would prefer there to be a free PDF to nothing. And sure, they might reproduce the books and sell them to us again. But when you consider that previous editions had this baked into the army books, like you used to get narrative scenarios, like, and they used to actually advocate for it in the rule book. They used to say, hey, this is something you can do. That feels like it's been stripped back. And to me, it feels like partially from the rule system, but also from the most vocal community, you are being pushed in towards playing competitively. Everyone's going, when's the match play guide? When's the match play guide? We need more scenarios. We need to be able to balance the game. We need to blah, 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 blah. Like, that's what the discourse is. And
I mean, I think it's important to note that when you say everyone, you mean the voices that we're hearing, rather than like maybe the silent majority, or I don't know if it's a majority or anything. I'm not going to guess how many numbers of each, but like the majority of the voices you are hearing are asking for very, very similar things.
Yeah, I think the reality is, isn't it? Like, it's probably true of most game systems, because the tournament crowd are constantly online to discuss, create lists, find events. They tend to be more vocal. There are going to be loads of communities that play SBG who essentially never interact with that, and they have their own little self-contained games. Like the club near me, they play Battle Companies pretty much every week, and they are pretty content just chugging along playing Battle Companies forever. And when they get to the end of one little narrative thematic thing they've done, they make a new one. Great. But like the problem is they don't talk about it. And all of the YouTube channels are just promoting competitive tournament reviews. And I mean, we were kind of, I guess, a little bit guilty of this, but I think we've always been a bit more varied, which probably hasn't helped our channel, if we're being honest.
But then I think the key bit there is that we were talking about the new edition, and in order to talk about the new edition, in a lot of ways, you kind of feel funneled down that kind of avenue. And maybe we are guilty of just echoing and almost like responding to the discourse that we also hear from other people. Like, maybe it's not that we're actually coming up with our own ideas, we're more just responding to what we see in the community.
Yeah, but to me, I think the new edition is interesting because they've kind of gone with the approach of every army is now thematic. It's impossible
Inverted
to take.
Commas.
Yeah, it's impossible to take an army that is not based on something from either the films or the books, because we have removed your ability to list build. And on the one hand, yeah, that is true. On the other hand, it's also removed some of the naturally occurring, authentically player created theme. My force, which is now a legendary legion in old money, legendary legions created very specific moments. If every army does that, then there's only really one thing that is thematically correct for my defenders of Helm's Deep army to be doing, which is fighting a load of Uruk-hai, and everything else feels in some way less thematic than just a sort of regular Rohan army did. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just a very different feel to the game. It's kind of taken your agency away to make your own theme. And it's now you have the theme that's imposed on you. And if you are trying to do a pickup game, it's now basically you play a competitive game and you play to win, because you can't create an authentic thematic experience, or at least it's more difficult, I think.
And it's also removed all possibilities for like the what if armies, right? Like what if like with your Faramir and Eowyn force or something, like because that's not included in the film, that's
that
just kind of dead now.
Died before it even took off.
Yeah.
But I think for me the interesting thing is like who is this new system for? It's for a very small group of players who thought that this was the way that the game should be played, but those were players who were actually tournament goers, and they thought that the tournament scene was being ruined by people like coming up with crazy lists and combining different armies. So they go, no, let's get rid of alliances, let's do it like this. Fine, But for everyone else who isn't a tournament goer and wasn't using list building to break the rules, actually, you could create all of the lists you wanted using the more sandbox thing. I last edition already ran what is now Road to Rivendell. I just did it without all of the fancy special rules it now gets. And that was fine because I wasn't especially fussed about having fancy special rules.
Well, we took it to a doubles, didn't we? And combined it with the elves and my Riv Knights list, which like not super thematic necessarily. Like you would never see that as an example of a list now, but in terms of actual theme, I think it was.
But it made sense, didn't it? Because my force are the force of the hobbits Aragorn and in the film Arwen getting to Rivendell. Your force was Rivendell. Like that's an authentic way of creating a themed force that makes sense without having to be, oh well, I didn't see it in the movie. But I suppose sort of the last thing on this topic before we sort of move on a little bit, where are players getting their way to play the game from? They're getting it from Games Workshop, who have now released books and released a way to play the game that feels very, very narrow. And they're getting it
in comparison to the old way, I'll say. I think there is still enough within the game, but like it has been restricted despite the fact there are now more lists.
Yeah, there's still a lot of lists. You're still going to get variation. I think when we move on to like, you can still play the game thematically, and like it is possible. It's just you have to do a bit more legwork, I guess, because the rules don't flex to what you want as much as they used to. But new players, that's the rules that are handed, and then where do they go to find information? Well, the biggest Facebook groups are competitive. The YouTubers are tending to focus on competitive stuff. And the only alternative to that are thematic channels, but they're like mega budget, let's build Helm's Deep.
Yeah.
And that's nice because it's like an aspirational... I think we've talked about this before for people who have sat and put up with multiple of our videos. We've discussed, haven't we, this idea of like living vicariously through that idea of most people are never going to have the space, money, time, or ability to create the entirety of Osgiliath like Zorpazorp does, but it's cool to watch him do it.
Yeah, but not put in like all the effort you have to, and like I think it's interesting, especially with Zorpazorp's videos, like the game almost fades into the background a little bit. Like you don't end up focusing so much on the actual interactions between like the fights and the dice and things like that. It does become a lot more about the spectacle. And I think that's always something. I'm not a huge bat rep fan. In fact, I'd say I hate most of them. But I think for the most part, his don't really feel like a bat rep. It feels like you're actually kind of a story's being told. And same for the Yogscast. I'll say that every time.
Well, I think we're both going to end up talking about the Yogscast because I think they do things in a way that we like. But anyway, we'll come back to that. But yeah, for me, it's just like no one's really talking about playing SBG just as a game without
the way it used to be,
without the baggage, I guess. And maybe this is just me seeking some sort of like nostalgia that doesn't exist. But anyway, just before we move on to discussing like how we can start sort of trying to make the game more thematic. For people who are thinking like, well, actually, I think that the new edition is more thematic and that's Games Workshop's focus. I just wanted to actually like focus on what Games Workshop published as their like interviews with the design team and like just focusing on like how they frame things, because I think it is revealing. So these are screenshots from Warhammer Community from when the game was being announced and they were doing the run up, I guess the press release, if you want to think of it like that.
If we're being a bit generous, we'll call it a press release. I prefer a hastily typed article from an intern, but what can you say?
Games Workshop hyping up their own product. But yeah,
well, we think it's good.
Yeah, exactly. But I pulled out two things because I thought they were interesting. thing. So this is where they were explaining the army building and why they made the changes and how they thought it was better. And it reads, quote, in the past, you could field characters together who never fought alongside each other in the established lore of the movies and books. This led to armies which did not fully represent the world of Middle-earth, something that we have tackled in the new edition. Now, what are they talking about there? They're talking about, aren't they? Competitive players are breaking the game by playing characters who don't go together. Because if they're saying we don't like you running this in a friendly game, like you just turn around and go, I don't give a fuck. I bought these models. I will play them how I want. And Games Workshop are not stupid enough to stop you, right? Like you can do whatever you want with the miniatures once you've bought them. Like set them on fire if you want. Like they've made their money.
Air fry them.
Exactly, and we do advocate for air fry models on this channel. That is clearly focused right on competitive players. They don't like what they were seeing people bring.
I think it's not explicitly saying competitive players, but I think it's implied because as you're saying, the only scenario in which this would be problematic is when, like, why they had to ban like red alliances and stuff like that, right? Because it just led to people exploiting the game. So while it might not explicitly say this is a competitive thing only, the only scenario I can really see this being an issue, as you said, is in a competitive scenario.
And then if we keep going with the quote, and this is where they do become a bit more explicit about what their actual intentions are. So, quote, we have improved internal balance, and there is much more strategic decision-making involved when picking your list. You can't just tack on Gwaihir, Aragorn, Witch King to an army to try to cover a weakness anymore. And this is where it becomes explicit, right? Covering a weakness, improving internal balance. They're talking about people playing the game in a competitive way because they want to win, and so they're list building to try and win. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that is only one way to play the game. And if you are then tailoring core rules and core ways to play to, I guess, quote unquote, fix that problem, you are making the game more tailored towards that idea, right? And then the next bit I picked out, so this was them explaining the army bonuses, and we know now that the army bonuses can be quite extreme. So
slightly game breaking. One might argue.
So they will also all have their own collection of special rules that help to evoke the scenes they're representing, many of which are completely unique. Like, fine, okay, they're trying to make things more thematic. It's like the Legendary Legions. Legendary Legions were cool. I thought they were cool. I know some people didn't like them, but I thought they were cool. Generally speaking, the more condensed an army list is, the more unique their special rules will feel. On the other hand, the list of more choices will have fewer special rules to balance the fact they have more heroes. So again, this is a balancing thing. If you make the lists more narrow, then they are obviously not going to do as well because they have really large flaws. So you have to introduce special rules to allow them to overcome the flaws. Like, again, it is a balancing thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
because they could have.
Because the two army bonuses that spring to mind are Eagles and the Army of the White Hand, right? And those are two lists that have quite fundamental flaws, i.e. Eagles is numbers, and Army of the White Hand is just low quality of troops, but they have special rules that are put in place to help them overcome that.
But even with like Ents, like just giving Ents like huge bonuses, like much bigger than last edition, like there's a very clear attempt, isn't there, to say, right, this force doesn't have cavalry, so how can we add something? Now, not every force has that. It is a bit lopsided, which probably means that it's not balanced very well, right? But like, if the point I always thought of these forces, they're meant to have flaws. That's what makes them interesting.
Yeah, it's always been your argument, isn't it?
Dwarves were more interesting when they didn't have cavalry because you had to play around that. If you just give them cavalry, well, okay, well, they're just really good now, aren't they? Now, I know that actually, in reality, competitively, dwarves are not like top tier necessarily. But like, you get my point. If you like just round out every force, they're just not that interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway,
it'd be like if you gave Shire access to, cavalry
fight five.
or a siege weapon, or and to be fair, I think actually Shire is just fundamentally very flawed. But Yeah,
If you
or
gave
ruffians.
Shire spears,
Well, yeah, free
then
spears. Yeah, they
then
would be
then
less bad.
they'd be less bad. But anyway, Shire haven't even been released yet, so you're getting
Mhm.
ahead of yourself in this edition.
I do also enjoy in the top section they said you can't just tack on Guai here, which is
And then
just
they added
fundamental.
him to like all good lists. Yeah,
It's just like, yeah, well, aside from people running pure eagles, I think anything else Guai here does tend to feel a bit tacked on. But
turns
he
out
is
that Tolkien really loved eagles turning up.
And then Guai here with his 4 attacks on the charge arrived, and
Yeah.
it was game over.
Anyway, I guess that's the ranty bit over. And now, rather than us just complaining,
We're going to provide you with
yeah.
some stuff to complain about.
Well, I guess we wanted to actually be like, maybe we should try and make suggestions and
Wow.
be more proactive rather than just saying we don't like
Sitting
stuff.
there complaining. That
And
is
if you
easier,
don't,
though.
yeah, if you don't like the ideas, that's fine. So we've sort of gone through, we've tried to come up with like easy ideas, medium difficulty ideas, and then like hardcore, hard difficulty ideas. So that's how we're splitting it up. So things that you can just really easily do to immediately make your games more thematic. My first thought was try and theme the objective markers. Like all too often, your objective marker is like a token that says one on
A grey disc.
a grey disc. But there's nothing preventing you from doing something much more creative. And actually, in a friendly game, do they need to be exactly 25 millimeters? Probably
Yes.
not. Probably not.
Otherwise, the game isn't balanced.
So, like, you can make scenarios more interesting by you're trying to rescue some injured veterans from a Skiliath, and suddenly your Gondor force it's much more kind of invested in that. Or you're looking for a lost dwarven ring. You know,
Yep.
you're searching for that, and that's the thing you're trying to find. Then you're holding on to it, and it's just kind of
Mhm.
like helping to create that story in your games, make that
Yeah.
theme there.
Mhm.
I guess. I thought another idea selecting scenarios. I know, shock.
Yeah.
I know that like because we're guilty of this too. Roll
Mm.
scenarios, do a veto. Oh,
Yeah.
I really don't like that scenario. But then you just always end up playing the same scenarios, and you end up rather than playing a scenario that's difficult for your army, you end up playing a scenario that's just kind of like, oh well, we kind of know who's probably going to win that one. We kind of know who's probably going to win that one. So I guess we'll play this one because you
Yeah.
probably will win, but it's better. That whole like idea, it's inherently like almost treating the game as like a chore, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whilst
Yeah.
if you just say, let's pick a scenario that makes sense for our forces,
Mhm.
and
And
then
it might not
play it
necessarily
out.
create the most fair game, but I think a lot of setting up properly for a thematic game is going to involve agreeing on the kind of thing that you want to occur. And like, you can your forces in a thematic game may not necessarily be that well balanced. One might be
Mm,
significantly stronger than the other, and I think that's okay.
yeah,
Like one army might just be, it's really against the odds. But do you know what? Actually, in a lot of thematic things in the world, that's probably pretty common.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Do you want to take us through a couple of other suggestions?
Yeah, just don't use a list from the internet. Don't power game. Just think of your own thing. And like if you want to swap out a model for a different thing and just say it is that thing, if you've got if you want something to replace a Faramir model that you think looks cooler, or you want to use it as long as your opponent is happy with that, then I think that's absolutely fine. I think definitely with the restrictions on list building now, if you do just want to, swap out a model or something, I personally would be completely okay with that.
Yeah. I think adding on to that, don't ask people on the internet for like, what should I include if I want
Yeah,
to like, because they're just going to funnel you towards the same
yeah,
min-maxed models.
yeah,
Like, just play it
yeah,
out for yourself. Like, if you're getting frustrated because you're losing, sure, maybe you like change things up, but like, don't immediately just go like, what's the latest meta? Like, see if you can win with stuff you like doing. I guess.
yeah. Yeah, because that will also be a much more gratifying feeling than
Hmm.
like I'd much rather win in spite of my list than because of my list. Um,
Yeah,
which
I
yeah,
I can say that like I don't really enjoy going to tournaments, but where I have actually felt like tournament games have been really enjoyable is usually actually when I've been taking like lists that aren't good, and I've actually
mm,
like managed to play myself into a situation where even if I don't win, I was still in it, and
yeah,
that feels more satisfying than the tournament where I took a really strong list and I was just miserable the whole time
yeah,
because it was just like, oh god, I should have really won that scenario. I had
mm,
all of the advantage, and then I fucked it up on a dice roll, and it
yeah,
was just so like deflating in comparison. So yeah,
yeah. Um, yeah, and if you can create motivations between your forces as to why they might be fighting, and that might, if you're really going for it, that might make them act differently in game. Like if you've even got something like heroic challenge and stuff now as well, which is quite usable. So you could have your two heroes facing off in a heroic challenge to decide the game, and that would be quite cool. Spinning
yeah,
that narrative.
yeah, absolutely. If you can create those narratives, that is really good. And for some people, that happens kind of organically, and for others, it's not quite as natural. But like, it's fun to
Yeah.
do. The
Mm.
reason why Gollum is on screen,
Yeah, that
I
was a
thought
game.
I just mentioned, but like we wanted to do a game where it was like the whole of Thrones Company versus the
Yeah.
whole of the Fellowship, and it was
Mm.
sort of like, okay, how do we like loads of people do that
How
game
do we do this?
because it makes sense. But I was kind of like, what do they have in common? Well, like both of them run into Smeagol or Gollum. So
Mm.
we themed the game that Gollum was the objective marker. He had stolen the ring, and Frodo and Bilbo needed to get it back. And yeah, it was a pretty messy game just because when you throw big heroes into each other, stuff happens quite quickly in SBG.
Mm.
But I think that it was quite a fun game to actually just play out.
Yeah.
Like it didn't feel like we were, staying zero
Yeah.
point 0.5 inches away from each other for an hour.
Yeah. And I think like that game it didn't feel like a normal game of SBG at any point. It would definitely,
Mm.
obviously the armies were a bit nuts, but it had sort of, because the objective was so variable, and especially you GMing really created some spicy moments. But yeah, it was a very entertaining game, and it did feel like we got away from maybe the more competitive aspect and were just
Yeah.
playing it out as it might actually occur.
I mean, I think we had like Gollum ended up killing someone, and I think someone in
Yeah.
the comments pointed out that he shouldn't have done, but it was just like, who cares? It's fun. It was like a good moment, you know?
Yeah,
And
there's
to
always
be
something
fair,
like
the person in the comments was like, I appreciate that like this wasn't that sort of game and that
yeah,
this was more entertaining. So
yeah,
like they got it, but like they were
yeah,
right. But like who cares? Like if it makes the moment.
yeah,
So yeah, those were some of the sort of easy suggestions, quick things that don't really require
mhm,
much the
yeah,
medium ones,
mm,
I guess, more stuff that needs a bit of planning, bit of
yeah.
preparation.
And this is sort
Um,
of like, this isn't things that are maybe ultra high effort and ultra high budget, but they
no,
are things that you would have to, get stuff together for, and a bit like us with scouring. Maybe I'd say this is kind of where we went for scouring. Like we did a bit of advanced planning. We had to get armies and terrain together, and we put a plan together, but we didn't spend like hours and hours and loads of
no.
money on it.
I mean, there's three of us, and between the three of us to do all of those scenarios, we dropped about probably actually less than 50 quid on terrain
Yeah.
to like do every single scenario. We went through and we went like, what buildings do we need and what can we double up? And
Mm.
then obviously models a bit more expensive. Getting all of the hobbits, we probably did drop like I'd say at
A
least like
substantial amount of money.
probably 100 to 150 quid.
Yeah.
But actually, like for the gameplay, for the painting, it's not that bad. And we got the
No.
ruffians on the cheek because we just use plastic
Yeah.
proxies. But like
Yeah.
that's just one example.
Mm.
But yeah. So my thought for thematic games, you don't have to run like a huge narrative campaign like Scouring. But my initial thought was you can link scenarios and you can actually do it really easily.
Mm.
And it only requires a little bit of pre-thought and planning and discussion with like a regular person you game with in order to make something that actually then turns into quite a cool thematic experience. So play a game of Reconnoitra, the models that get off the table, the winner, then maybe they choose the table edge of the next game. And that kind of like little thing where, yeah, you don't follow the rules to the absolute letter of you roll a dice and then somebody chooses a table edge. But like if you're doing a Maelstrom game, maybe your warbands get a +1 bonus if you got them off in Reconnoitra. You know, little things like that. And it's just like if you're playing a game, then you're going to play next week, but you already know you've got that little advantage. Like it almost like makes that game next week feel a bit more like you're looking forward to, where it feels like it's more important, like it actually matters. But it's not mattering in like I'm getting GBHL tournament points and like everything has to be like so much pressure. It's like, no, this is actually cool. We're like creating an experience to enjoy together. I was sort of like, don't be afraid to alter existing scenarios.
I think 100%.
Change where the objectives are placed. Like you can make some scenarios like a really cool like defenders versus attackers scenario just by moving the objectives behind like a bit of scenery and having a forced defender. And if you're kind of thinking to yourself, oh, that won't be fair, really easy way to do defenders and attackers, just have the defenders have less points. They have the advantage of defending. The attack has to push them off, just like take away like 20% of their points and just like see if they can still do it. And like it's a challenge for that player, and it's a fun thematic thing as well. Yeah, and it can be more extreme. So like, could you link it so that you literally keep a record of all the models that get off the board in Reconnoitra, and then those turn up as reinforcements for the next game? Like, yeah, you could do something like a bit wackier, but like I think it's just like a fun idea just to actually have a think about what can you do with that sort of thing.
And an easier version might be, you know, tracking the stats of a hero or something.
Yeah.
And a particular hero, maybe the one who's killed more gets one bonus, and the one who's killed less gets a different bonus.
Or you can throw in like the Legolas Gimli rule.
Yeah.
Like have whoever's killed more, like the other enemy hero gets a bonus to catch up. Like get that rivalry kind of idea going between your two leaders. Maybe not a good idea if you've brought like Azog and you're like Azog now kills on a 1+. But but like if it's a bit more chill and you know you just roll like a King of Man versus Lurtz or something, you can kind of, I guess, moderate it out and have a think.
And then like you can also just the way you set up your board. So if you want to theme the scenery a bit, as we were saying, like we didn't go nuts, but if you can have, you know, things that fit fairly logically together, it does really kind of help. And it doesn't have to be, you know, crazy stuff like generic woodland, for instance, and, you know, fences and hedges and stuff you can get for cheap from you know, most wargaming places, and they won't cost you as much as, you know, the head in the bottom right of this this slide.
The legendary head. Yeah, I mean nowadays with MDF terrain, does MDF terrain last forever? No, it will eventually break. Can you get 4 hobbit holes for like £10? Yes. Do they look as good as like the amazingly sculpted ones that people make? No, but they're half the price, take 1/10 of the time to put together, probably less actually, and paint, and it just immediately gives you something. And there's loads of stuff out there, and terrain, especially of like 3D printing, maybe not resin terrain, but if you get like the filament stuff, that is quite cheap as well. Like I bought like a ruined temple for like 10 quid off Etsy. It's available.
If you paint them up like even to a semi-reasonable standard, like I'm thinking of our Shire stuff wasn't amazingly painted. Like we did all the fences in, what was it, like 5 minutes or something. We just did like a brown dry brush.
Yeah,
On,
whilst
on
we were waiting for Mayor to arrive, weren't we? We just had a
and
drink and just dry
yeah.
brush brown on some words, and it was like, yeah, job done.
Yeah, and like they looked absolutely fine for,
Yeah,
the entirety of the Shire stuff. And you did the same with like hedges and things.
yeah.
Obviously, like full respect to anybody who goes nuts on their terrain. There's some amazing looking stuff out there, but as we're saying, I think for 95% of people or something, they just won't have the time or even like the skill just to do that. And you can get a decent end product without
I
going
mean,
that nuts.
if you're not playing at a club, I think probably like a lot of people are using unpainted terrain or not
Yeah,
even like proper terrain, but like actually just spending a little bit of hobby time not focusing on your miniatures and just like
yeah,
giving your terrain, like you can give terrain like 10% of the love that you give your miniatures and it
yeah,
looks fine.
yeah,
No
yeah.
problems. You just dry brush over kind of brown, dark brown or sort of black um
Mm.
spray paint and it looks good enough.
Yeah. And like gaming mats as well, like you can
Yeah.
often get them really, really cheap on sale. And we've got some green ones and some deserty ones, and it's
Hmm.
just nice not having just like a bare table and stuff like that. Like that can
Yeah.
again really, really just enhance things. But
If you're into barrel companies, you want to play on like a little micro 2 foot by 2 foot or 3 foot by 3 foot board, you can get like even neoprene mats for like 20 quid or under
yeah,
if you just wait for them to hit a sale sort of thing.
yeah,
But yeah, so those are some medium ideas, a bit more planning, but actually they're not as difficult as you might think, and they can really kind of like add
yeah.
little bits and pieces.
Mm,
The final one then, so things which are going to require more time.
yeah,
Um, the first one, creating your own scenarios. You could as well create your own army list. The only reason why I haven't suggested that is because I think that's probably more difficult, and you're
and I think
probably
that's a
investing a lot
very
of time.
it's a very separate idea to what we're talking
Yeah,
about here, isn't it? Because
yeah,
that then becomes less about theme and more about balance and
yeah,
what's kind of reasonable. And
yeah,
while I'm all for, I think an easier solution is, as I said earlier, just to swap out models into existing lists, which, while they're not all perfectly balanced, I think there are definitely some balance issues in this edition. They will at least be reasonable. And there are enough kind of semi-generic like man, dwarf, whatever lists out there. You could probably, especially when we get armies of Middle Earth, that you can probably find something that will fit fairly well.
yeah. Absolutely. Um, how can you create your own scenarios? You can. I would say that you can look at how SBG scenarios are created and notice some trends, and essentially you either go down the route of following the trends but altering it to be something a bit more specific.
Yeah.
So, like, rather than having the little objective markers, you're choosing like a specific thing that you've created that is going to be the focus of whatever it is.
Mm,
Something though that I want to suggest is looking at other game systems and taking how they do scenarios and adding it.
yeah.
And I probably would recommend not looking at game systems which are meant to be competitive for this. So, like, I know that some people want SPG scenarios to be more like 40k scenarios where you have like cards and secondary objectives. I guess a bit like Legion, but not as well executed. But you know what I mean? Where like you
Yeah,
draw,
yeah,
you like
yeah.
have, and it creates like a unique game and deployment, that sort of thing.
Mm,
But I'd more be looking at like what do games which are thematic do well in their scenarios?
yeah.
Are they sandboxy? Do they have random elements? So, for
Mm,
example, Lion Rampant scenarios in Lion Rampant are really, really basic. They're usually like you are fighting over something in the middle of the table, or you are
yeah.
trying to kill a specific unit. Like they're very, very basic, kind of like what the core SBG scenarios are. But the way
Mm,
they spice up those scenarios is you can do little things like your leader can make a boast. And if your leader achieves that objective in the game, then it can get some victory points. But the boasts are like really wacky. So you can say, like, my leader's going to refuse to charge for the entire battle, and if I can achieve that for the entire battle, then I will get 3 victory points. And that kind of sounds crazy, but actually it completely changes the game, right?
Yep.
Like suddenly your opponent is kind of going like, well, he could charge me,
But
but
will he?
he might want to hold on to 3 victory points. I could just ignore the leader for the entire game if he's not going to charge, or I can
Mm.
try and force him into a position where he has to charge so that he loses those victory points. And actually, suddenly, rather than playing the same scenarios over and over, and I guess people start to just naturally fall into the rhythm of this is how I win said scenario, and you get those horrible games where people like refuse to charge each other, or they
What do
work
you mean?
out,
They sit on either side of the board and go for a
yeah,
draw?
or they work out a way of killing their army with a mummock, and
Mm.
they win because they have a banner and their opponent doesn't.
Yeah.
As some random examples that have suddenly occurred to me
Mm.
that I'm sure have never been done in real life.
We should put those on Reddit.
Yeah, or the GBHL Facebook group to see how people react. But anyway, like rather than doing that, like it's a new idea, it hasn't been solved, and you can be a bit more thematic, and actually the game won't feel like it's so,
Yep.
you know, rigid, I guess. So that's something to consider.
Mm.
Asymmetrical scenario design, I guess, is quite similar. So shall we go through that one as well as a suggestion?
Yeah. I mean, the one that sprung to mind for me straight away for this is, do both armies in SBG have to be playing the same scenario at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
So the example I use when we were thinking of this is, if you're doing Burning of the Westfold, for instance, you could have a smaller Rohan force that's trying to play recon, for instance. They're just trying to get a scout off the board, but the Uruks are trying to do like destroy the supplies or something, burn down the houses, but they also need to stop the Rohan getting off the board. And I
Yeah.
think there are, obviously, I'm not saying that would necessarily be balanced, or if you power gamed it, I think it could be potentially be pretty miserable. But as an idea for a thematic thing, it could work pretty well.
But I think actually for most people, because they would have never played a game like that before, unless they do have that really like competitive mind, they're not immediately going to be like, this is how I power game this. Like they probably are going to play the game as intended. Because I think most people probably like the first time they play a game, that is what they do. And then they learn from others how you're
Supposed to play.
quote unquote supposed to play it so that you can win, and they adapt to that. But if you're not focusing on that, then yeah, you can just sort of play like that. Yeah, so that side objectives, sort of linking back to something I briefly mentioned as well earlier. Could you just make the forces unequal to create an asymmetrical design? Like one force is smaller than the other, less points or less models, or the force. I was actually thinking of a terrible scenario that we absolutely hate in the original Blue Book. So the
Oh
2000,
yeah.
2005 one where you have to split your army in two and the opponent picks which half. Like on the surface, that does sound horrible, but as a like thematic game of
There's
like,
something interesting there.
if you're deploying half of your army in the middle, and then all you have to do to win is literally just get a model off the board,
Yeah.
and then your opponent has to just try and stop you, like that could be quite tense. It's a very low barrier to win, but you've literally, it's like 2-1 odds. Like that's something that I think does have potential for thematic games. Maybe not in its original form, where I think it was a bit like, how the hell does this make a good game in that form of SPG? But there's something to it.
Well, you could also, if you're splitting them in half, you could have one half of your army starts on the board, and then the other half's like a relief force or something that comes on later. Maybe that's a bit similar to scenarios that already exist with reinforcements or something. But again, if you're doing, I don't know, the Fords of Eisen or something, you could have that relief force turning up a bit later.
Yeah. I think just like turn limits on SPG is an interesting idea. Like, because SPG doesn't have turn limits, actually saying like the game's going to end in 12 turns.
Yeah.
Like suddenly you can't just infinitely not do something. You actually have to go to yourself, like, I need 4 turns to actually get where I'm going, so am actually
Mm.
going to have to act like that. That's, I think, just something that you could quite easily do
I'm
potentially.
gonna plug Legion here. That is one of the
Yeah,
really good things about New Legion is you can be getting absolutely shot to shit, but you can still win the game if you get to the place you need to be on time. And I think
yeah.
like this idea of losing the battle but winning the war, I think is inherently quite interesting.
But I
And
mean, like,
maybe
sorry, go on.
I was just thinking like often in SBG like it tends to be maybe well for my games. Obviously, people in the comments will disagree at this point, but it often feels like a bit of a pitch battle, and then some dice rolls go one way or the other, and things tend to snowball a little bit. Like it doesn't feel like unless I have cavalry or something or an eagle where they could just run in, grab an objective, and get away or something. It doesn't necessarily feel like that, but maybe that's not fair.
Yeah, I was just actually thinking though, like, SPG is kind of unusual not having a turn limit, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it is.
So, like, I'm not like, that is actually something that is like a kind of uniqueness to it. And there are
Mm.
benefits to it in some ways, but there are also reasons why other games have tournaments, and it's maybe interesting just to experiment with it as a concept,
It
perhaps.
would be really interesting to see how long each scenario, obviously individually, but how long does the average game of MESBG, how many turns does it go if you're not camping at
Yeah,
the back and playing infinitely?
definitely more,
Because
I think, than most games, because most games are like probably actually only 3 to 6 turns, but a lot
yeah,
of games are a lot more killy than SBG.
yeah,
Like SBG as a game, you are often looking to roll 5s or 6s to do most stuff, so it just
mm.
inherently is less
And also with
stuff.
SBG, I think there's a bit more like initial maneuvering in a lot of scenarios, and
Yeah.
sort of it.
And
I
all of
think
that's good stuff. That's like why
yeah, yeah,
people like SBG, right? Because it
yeah,
feels more kind of authentic in that sense. But I
yeah,
don't think it's bad to like change it up.
yeah,
We've got off topic here, haven't we? We're just meandering our way through general stuff. Campaigns
mm,
could be narrative. You could grab an old narrative scenario book from a previous edition and update it. Could
yeah,
be something that you make yourself. Um, I was thinking, like, if you like battle companies, I'm pretty sure in battle companies there are like rules for turning your battle company into a war band.
yeah.
So obviously that's now the previous edition, but can you do that kind of thing?
If
Um,
you had multiple war bands from a similar-ish faction at the end, and some on the opposition side, like once they're all leveled up and stuff, maybe see what happens. Obviously, it might be a complete disaster, but see what happens if you throw them all in together.
yeah, really easy campaign idea. So I'm using Line Rampant again because I think that Line Rampant is a really good one for creating like naturally thematic games. But the way Line Rampant does it, one of its campaign suggestions is like you have 5 games and you have 5 forces of different points. They're not like massively different. So in Line Rampant, it's like some games you'll have 24 points, some you'll have 32,
Oh
some.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then you, without your opponent knowing, sort of write down which list you're going to bring to each game.
Mm,
And then there's a little bit of kind of like bluff to it because it's like, well, I know that my opponent's list is really good at this battle. So maybe they will, because they're confident, put their lowest points in.
yeah,
So actually, maybe I'll put my highest points in, but then like my opponent might think that, and so, it's just like a nice way of actually getting. Most games in reality will probably still be roughly equal points,
yeah,
but when you get those little campaign games where like suddenly your force is outnumbered, and you've got to
mm,
try and win so that you can keep your campaign on track and sort of gain whatever bonus it is for next game or whatever it is in that sort of sense. Like that's actually quite an easy way to do a campaign without too much work because you can use
yeah.
existing scenarios and sort of just link
Because
them
inherently
naturally.
in that game, right, you've given up an advantage to get one
Hmm.
later on. Like
Yeah,
it's kind of you've inflicted this on yourself, but then you have to try and make the best of it with what you've got, and just because I
yeah,
quite like that way of it's not self-balancing in a sense, but like it would enable you to, as you're saying, you're making the decisions rather than it being done randomly with a dice roll, which I think is always nice. Like even if the decision is in some ways quite surface level, like having that agency is always a nice thing.
And also it's nice because like if you get screwed at the beginning of the campaign in a game and your opponent has a bigger force, you know that the campaign is going to end strong because you've then got the bigger force later on.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, and then your opponent's thinking like, oh, well, I've
I've got to
blown
win
my
this.
I've blown my good game now, so I've now got to work out how I'm going to manage the rest of the campaign to make sure that by the end my opponent doesn't swing things back around. So it's just like lots of interesting things to do, and I think that just in terms of like adding thematic interest to games, making games kind of consequential without needing to go to a tournament or play in like the most competitive way possible. That's campaigns are really good. Obviously, map campaigns, but I don't think we really have enough experience with them to offer suggestions.
No.
And then the last thing, kind of similar to what we said for medium, but I guess it's just more extreme. Making a custom board doesn't have to be like Zorp, but doing something a little bit extra. Centerpiece terrains. You suggested, didn't you, like casualties?
Yeah, like they used to come in the old Riv Knights box. You got like a dead elf on the floor or something, but I'm sure you can get generic medieval casualties for cheap on the or just use something from your spares box and whack it. You don't have to whack it on a base if you don't want to. Just put them lying down on the floor.
Imagine 3D printer offerings have them as well.
Yeah, and that could be really good. But I think one thing that is important to emphasize with any terrain that you make or paint is that you're going to end up getting really good value from it, because unless it's really specific, you can pretty much slot them in. A river, generic woodland, whatever. It will find a spot. Like, look at next time you're at a tournament, just look how many generic woodland or fences or whatever on the board, and you will just get a lot of value from it.
Even more specific stuff, like, because like the Hobbit holes that we bought seem pretty specific, but actually we've used them loads. It's just in like a regular game we're like, let's just throw down the Hobbit scenery, let's have the battle in the Shire, why not? Like, so cool, there we go. Wow, that was a much longer video than I thought it was going to
be. And all high quality.
Complaining.
Our thinly veiled agenda against Big Spugger is finally unveiled.
But like I kind of want to do, like, this is kind of what I want to do with the channel. Like, we don't have as big an audience as lots of other SBG channels, but actually, like, I think that quite a lot of our regular viewers are kind of like, that this is like actually more like how we view things, and it's sort of like just providing a voice and discussing it and making sure that it's not fading into the background almost.
Because obviously there's in any game that you want to play, there is a space for a competitive scene, but it can be very taxing to play a game very competitively even in just like pickup games. Like a pickup game against another person can just be quite tiring if you're both taking it very seriously. But if you are just thinking more thematically, and rather than thinking what I should do, just doing what kind of feels right, can just make games run a whole lot smoother, because then you're not focused on, the wargaming inches or whatever. You're focused on, actually, I think my Rohan Royal Guard will charge in here, even though it's probably not the optimal play, because it feels like what I should do. Like, I think there's maybe something a bit healthier in that mindset.
Switching your brain off a little bit, and you're not playing badly deliberately, but not gaming it so much does make a world of difference. Like, not always worrying about, like, am I exactly 6.5 inches away to ensure that they can't charge me next turn, or like that sort of thing. Like, does it really matter? Like, maybe if you're at a tournament, but if you just want to like roll some dice, play a thematic game, maybe it doesn't.
And I think it is one of the nice, for some people, aspects of SBG is just like becoming an expert in the minutiae of the game does genuinely clearly give you an edge. I would never dispute that. There are players who have spent a lot of time getting good at this game, and they do seem to win pretty consistently. So there is definitely skill in it. But I think for a lot of people who don't have the time to necessarily for those things to become habit and to
Care.
get in, yeah, or don't care, like maybe just as you're saying, just taking a step back and yeah, switching your brain off might be a bit nicer.
Yeah. There we go. Let us know in the comments if anyone has made it far, your thoughts.
What did we ask last
Um,
time? Tell us if you're not listening or something. Wasn't that
yeah.
what we said at the end?
I enjoyed the couple of comments we got being like, I'm not listening. Like, perfect. Yeah. I do think for this one though, like I know that North aren't super. I guess we do engage our audience, but we're not like really over the top. But like, I am genuinely interested. Like, do
Yeah.
people actually think it is useful hearing us talk about
Mhm.
this sort of stuff, or does actually everyone just think like, you know what, new players can do what they want? Actually, you're reading too much into it, and no one is feeling especially like the game is being pushed towards competitive stuff, and don't worry about it. And in
Yeah.
which case, like, fair enough, I won't, and we can stop talking about it. But if
Mhm.
people do agree and they think that actually, yeah, we need, well, we don't need to. That's a bit extreme, isn't it?
Because I think also a lot of the plans we make when we're planning for what we're going to do with SBG in the future, because we are going to come back to it at some point, do revolve around like a theme or a campaign or an
Yeah,
idea. And I think especially as I mean I have zero intention of going to a MESBG tournament anytime soon. Like I don't think it's particularly valid for us to. I mean, Mayor could talk about it because he does go to tournaments and does play the game pretty competitively
yeah.
and
Although
pretty
I don't
well.
know if Mare really enjoys making the tournament videos over and over and
Yeah.
over, because they do end up feeling a little bit similar. And I mean, the people who love doing that, like, fair play, but
Yeah. I mean, we
yeah,
could make him do
chain him to a desk,
it.
make
Look, we're not asking
content,
much. You just need to go through for an hour and talk about your games.
describe every dice roll in
Yeah.
incredible detail.
How many natural sixes did you roll? Mm.
Delicious Nat 6. Yeah,
Um,
good. So yeah, drop us a comment. Let us know what you think.
are you
We
listening?
can, yeah, we can come back and talk more about this sort of stuff and where we think the game is going. I think there's probably a video in like discussing like what's going to happen to narrative. Like,
Mm.
is narrative gaming dead? And
Yes.
like, yeah, potentially. But
I
then
don't know.
if narrative gaming's dead, like that was why SBG was created.
It's
So
where it came from. It's where like I think
how
it's a
does
really
that
good point
work?
you made about the early scenarios that clearly because there wasn't it was almost expected that you always played good versus evil, right, in those
Yeah,
scenarios or something.
yeah.
But it's so interesting. If you do have the old rule book or anything in your cupboard, go and have a look at it because it's pretty wild to compare it to
How the
where the
game has
game is now.
changed. Yeah,
Yeah.
and all of the like fact that you have to specify like active and passive rules on
Yeah.
spells and stuff and
Yeah.
special rules just because
And like
people can't handle like not having stuff like that specified now.
and everyone like there were loads of repeated stat lines. For instance, like there were multiple
Mm,
Orc and Urukai heroes that just literally had the same stat
yeah,
line, and they were just different models.
I mean,
And
just like we said it before, like the Knights
yeah,
now, it's like Aragorn used to have Mighty Hero, and now it's like, and now he rolls a million dice for a million different reasons, and his horse has a name, and he does this for some reason, and if he's in this army, he does this as well. Like,
yeah,
wow, this is a lot and not super friendly to somebody just starting out. And
or somebody who wants to play a pickup game because you're constantly staring at your
yeah,
book, being like, "Oh no, Thranduil does or of dismay, or whatever the fuck it
Yeah.
is. Instill fear, isn't it? Sorry, from the previous edition. Anyway,
And
I think we're tangenting again.
we are rambling. This is isn't it? We'll come back and if we so feel. Cool. Thank you for listening, everyone. I have been Onod. OT has been OT.
And Mayor was not here.
Goodbye.